Patsqualtinoyap, Siam, Sioyoqua, Si Talkton, Quashaman Snot, the Squamish Okamilk. Just opening in the Squamish, the Squamish language, saying it's great to see each and every one of you, respected leaders, honored guests, friends, and relatives. My ancestral name is Si Talkton. I am one of 16 elected council members of the Squamish Nation, and it's just an honor to be here. And on behalf of my people, the great nation of Squamish Nation, and our council, want to formally welcome you to this virtual event. It's kind of different, kind of doing addresses when we're not based in place. So my message to all of you as an Indigenous leader is reconcile yourself with wherever you are on this Zoom call. And if you don't know the Indigenous place that you're in, or the Indigenous nations that have occupied your space since time immemorial, take it on yourself as your own token of reconciliation, to reconcile yourself with that history and that knowledge, and to pay homage to the original peoples of those lands. So I join you from close by near a village called Homolcheson, which is Capilano Ire number 5 in North Vancouver or West Vancouver, at the north embutment of the Lionsgate Bridge. Born and raised at that village. I live a little off the community now, but just recognizing the place as Indigenous peoples, our homelands and our territories are laden with mythology, with place names that remind us of our resilience. They remind us of what has happened and how the landscape has transformed over time. And those stories and those place names remind us of who we are and where we should come from, but also how we should conduct ourselves as human beings in that natural space, in that natural place. So I'm humbled to be here with all of you to provide a little bit of a welcome. Again, I encourage all of you, if you don't know the place that you're at in terms of what Indigenous nation claims, and has been there since time immemorial, please take it upon yourself to learn that and recognize that. So as Indigenous peoples, when we go somewhere outside of our traditional territory, you'll notice the first things we do is we honor the original people of that land. So if I'm not in Squamish territory, my first thing I have to do before I say anything is to recognize that nation that hosts that land. So again, I know we're in a virtual space, but I do want to thank you all for all of the things that you do to understand the resilience of human beings and our resilience as we're in a global pandemic, and how we learn from place-based knowledge and ensuring that we're understanding the risk and the ever-changing landscape that we live in. Osiam Tamakwitsi Snachum, those are my words. Welcome all.
Thank you so much for helping us start in a good way, Sitaqton. We're thankful for being connected to the Squamish Nation and the other nations that we've been thinking about and hearing from throughout the Understanding Risk series. We know that building resilience is truly something that has to happen in a collaborative way. And we do that by engaging with the people who have been stewards of this land since time immemorial, and engaging across sectors so that we can do this in a way that is both building on the strengths of the past and a sense of what the shared future can look like. So thank you. My name is Susanna Haas Lyons, and I am the engagement lead for Understanding Risk BC. I'm grateful to be located on the unceded, occupied, ancestral, and traditional lands of the Kwantlen, Katzie, Semiahmoo, and Musqueam nations. And for me, I'm lucky enough to have the Kwantlen Nation right across the river, and to have that relationship be an opportunity to help inform my work, which is really about bringing people together to collaborate across our usual silos. And that's really what Understanding Risk is about. is about the power of cross-sectoral collaboration. So today we have a wonderful opportunity to reflect on all that we've accomplished over the past number of months, over 20 sessions, and to be able to both report back, talk about where we're going, and to celebrate. Of course, I want to give thanks to the sponsors of our Understanding Risk this year. Natural Resources Canada and the Canadian Safety and Security Program really stepped up to make it possible for this work to have a strong foundation with the support of additional players. You can see here that that theme of multi-sectoral involvement shows up in our sponsors as well, with the Insurance Bureau of Canada, the Office of Housing and Construction Standards of BC, the BGC Consultancy, Earthquake Engineering Research Institute, the BC chapter, the BC Real Estate Association, and the Engineers and Geoscientists of BC. So thank you to all of you for supporting us. I'm going to talk a little bit about what we're doing here today, and then I want to hear, using the chat, a little bit from you folks about what you're bringing into the session here today. So in terms of thinking about sort of who we are, that this is a community, it's an exceptional community, truly, of planners, engineers, policymakers, researchers, students, citizens, artists, and more coming together. And we offered over the length of the URBC effort, summer webinars, 2 launch events at the beginning of September and November, some workshops that focused on initiatives that are going on in our region right now, and thinking about how can the community learn about and catapult forward. We did dialogue panels where we heard from expert voices around the continent. We are doing today's report back and celebration. URBC has been active on social media, and we are offering the results of URBC through providing videos and slides that you can use in an ongoing way. The objectives of what we were trying to achieve through URBC were about reporting on the progress of actionable strategies and outcomes from previous and ongoing UR symposiums, as well as related disaster risk reduction and climate change adaptation efforts, to demonstrate some components of the BC Disaster Risk Reduction Hub and identify some opportunities for its short-term priorities and advance its long-term sustainability, advancing partnerships and both that are both essential and non-traditional across the science policy action interface, making connections across projects and really supporting action of both existing recommendations and the commitments that have been made in relation to climate and disaster risk management. This is what we've done. And here are the sessions. You can see we have been very busy over the summer, September, October, and November. Over 20 marvelous events, and I hope you were able to enjoy as many of them as you could. Today's purpose is to talk about the outcomes and connect the outcomes of the URBC sessions, to celebrate this community and our accomplishments, and also to orient to hope and activate ourselves to implement resilience strategies. We'll be doing that by hearing from Councillor Lewis to hear the Squamish Nation storytelling. We'll be hearing some brief presentations from the different sessions. We'll have improv comedy. We'll take a quick break. We'll hear some reflection presentations. There'll be more comedy and thinking about hope and action for a resilient future, and then what our next steps are. So for everyone, what we'd like to do is to ask you to go to the chat right now and answer the question here that I've just pasted, is what's been most valuable to you about Understanding Risk BC this year or since 2017, because this is our 3rd symposium. What's been most valuable to you? I'm seeing a lot of connections, discovering progress, bring people from different silos together, connecting across the community, learning about who's who in the field, understanding what's at play, the diversity of the community, that we are in a community and we can help one another and do this together, hearing about the information on initiatives and programs at various levels of government, an informal network of risk practitioners, hearing what's going on in terms of action and resilience in disaster risk reduction, getting exposed to the people who are leading some of this work and engage with stakeholders and the community, learning about how to connect during a health emergency and all actually prosper as a community. To do this in a productive and effective way during a pandemic is pretty impressive. Learning about the progress that's going on, communicating science in bite-sized chunks, seeing progress over time, and getting a breadth of different perspectives and on. Building momentum to keep each other going for the next year, driving towards common objectives and outcomes. Fabulous. Please keep them coming. And at this point, I'd like to pass it over to my colleague, Jessica Shoubridge.
Thank you, and huge thanks to Susanna, who's been our engagement lead, as she mentioned, since 2017. I myself have been leading on the program side of things since 2017. Hopefully won't repeat too much of what Susanna's covered, but just a little bit of background on the URBC community as well, for those who are maybe not as familiar. The effort has generally been fostering this all of society collaboration to implement Sendai and build resilience in Southwest BC. What does all of society really mean? For us, it's meant connecting a diversity of voices and types of knowledge across cultures, disciplines, the public, private, and NGO sectors, as well as across hazards, the different natural hazards that especially we face here in Southwest BC. The all of society approach sounds really nice, but it's often, I guess, underestimated in terms of the time and energy and investment that goes into fostering that. So that's a big part of what we try to do. The value of dialogue, I think, is often underestimated, but a critical part of this effort in terms of reducing risk and building resilience. Again, UR has been collaborative since its inception, and as some of you know, we've used seed funding from a variety of organizations and leveraged that through additional sponsorships to put these symposiums on across the years. There is no current sustainment model in place. Sahar's session outlined the BC DRR hub concept, which is a piece of this and sustaining the symposiums over time, as well as establishing a more formal and ongoing risk governance mechanism that does contribute to this effort over time. But there is no, some people assume there's a URBC staff. There is no URBC staff, and generally this happens through what Marie has termed a coalition of the willing. So Susanna has created a wonderful survey, which all of you will hopefully fill out today, and that anybody can reach out to us in terms of an interest in a 2021 symposium and contribute on that survey with regards to this concept of sustainment and next year's symposium. As Susanna mentioned, we've developed actionable strategies through the past symposiums, and as I outlined in the opening, reflecting going into 2020, I was very heartened in terms of how many of these actions have moved forward, despite the lack of a formal risk governance mechanism. So very heartening to see that these things do get done. I guess the hope is that they could just get done faster, be accelerated through enhanced collaboration. And I think with regards to the relative risk that we face, there is some urgency. The disaster risk that we have in Southwest BC is quite real, quite large, and does require, I think, this sustained effort over time. These actionable strategies are aligned with Sendai and many other government reports at all levels, from the City of Vancouver Resilience Strategy to the BC Auditor General's Climate Risk Report and the Pan-Canadian Framework at the national level, and specifically the resilience elements included therein. This year's symposium has been quite a feat. We had one in-person kickoff workshop in February, which seems like a lifetime ago at this point. And the value of that in-person workshop is not to be underestimated. And it's a key part of how we develop the program for understanding risk symposiums. We use a bottom-up approach by getting the community together to capture what the key themes and areas to focus on for that specific year are. And this year we had a number of these initiative and focus sessions that were offered, as you'll hear through today's session. We hosted 20 online events with almost 40 hours of programming, 12 initiative and focus sessions, 4 dialogue sessions, We had 238 registrations with over 1,000 attendances from across Canada, Italy, Germany, the USA, and elsewhere. We had 6 organizing committee members, 20 session conveners, 60 contributors, and 19 volunteers. So in essence, a small army of people working to bring this to you. 10 graphic recordings, 5 storytelling and artistic contributions, countless laughs, and innumerable professional connections were made and strengthened. I think the countless laughs part is one of those qualitative measures that is very important, especially when we're thinking about disaster risk and resilience all the time. It's important to have those laughs along the way. Susanna's already captured our agenda for today, just looking at some of the major takeaways from the sessions and reflections from the community of practice. What are those big moves that we need to implement to shift our trajectory to a more resilient 2050 for tomorrow and for 2050 in the Georgia Basin? Without further ado, I'll pass that back over to Susanna.
It's my pleasure to reintroduce Sitaq'tun, the Squamish Nation Councillor Chris Lewis. We heard just a bit around how the Squamish community knows how to live with risk and has demonstrated that for millennia. We're going to get a better insight into that, hearing about the story of Nshkai, the Great Flood. Councillor Lewis, over to you.
Thank you, Susanna, and thank you all for having me this afternoon, and just an honor and a pleasure to tell you a little bit of history, a small sliver of history around Squamish Nation resilience, living in ever dynamic and changing world we now know as the Squamish Sea to Sky corridor, and we all know the associated risk with debris flows and all of those earthquakes and volcanic areas and all of those types of things. Left the land with a lot of stories that a lot of people don't know. So it's my pleasure to kind of share with all of you as policymakers, as people that want to understand place-based risk and all of those types of things, a little bit of the Indigenous worldview in terms of a place we now know as the Sea to Sky corridor, or the heart of Squamish Nation territory. As I spoke to Susanna and Murray a couple of weeks ago around what I should be talking about, I reminded them that the Squamish people and many Indigenous peoples don't have one origin story where it's just like the beginning of time, and then there's usually many chapters of change or many chapters of origin where, you know, we were once upon a time in the mythological times, we could communicate with the animals. We were one with all of nature. And then something happened that completely decimated all of us and kind of taught us a lesson. And then we had to repopulate the land again. And then there's stories of droughts and fires and famine where the salmon didn't return. And all the Squamish people died, except for maybe 1 or 2 families. Then we had to repopulate. What's really interesting about all of these origin stories that we have as Squamish people and many Indigenous people have is they all have the same lesson. It's that for some reason, we as humans fell out of the natural rhythm of the world. We forgot our teachings, as our elders would tell us. And as a result of not listening to the people that have the gifts to tell us what's going to happen, that maybe we get greedy and we start taking too much fish, or we start abusing kind of our relationship with the natural world. All of these things happen, and then there's a serious consequence to the people as a result of that. So our elders, when you're a little child, they'll tell you stories about places and kind of what the Squamish people went through, going through. But for the purpose of my presentation, I'll talk a little bit about the flood, which was one of the major catalysts of origin and repopulation, and talks a lot about resilience as it pertains to Inchikai, which many people know as Mount Garibaldi. The Squamish people know it as Inchikai, which means, if we translate that into Squamish, it means the dirty place. because of all the glacial till that comes off the mountain and dirties the waters and the creeks that come off Inchikai or Mount Garibaldi. So the place for the Chikai River is called Inchikai as well because it's always dirty. It's not a testament to the mountain. The mountain is quite grand and beautiful. And when we asked our elders about the mountain, they will tell us the story about the flood and not that it's a dirty place. So I kind of put it in that context in terms of that connection to the land and how we lean to the teachings of the place to remind us as Squamish people on what we should do and how we should conduct ourselves in terms of that. I read the flood story very quickly this morning. It took me about 4 to 5 minutes to read through it. It's a short read. There's a longer version, but I'm just going to read it for you because I think it's really important to kind of hear it the way I heard it as a child growing up, and I continue to hear it from our elders. So I'll start with the flood story, and then I'll jump in terms of how it relates to what we're dealing with today. So the flood, long, long ago, the Squamish Indians were first created. They were given 3 special helpers. This was the doctor, the Scompton, the medicine man or the ritualist, and the Quasakes or the prophet. The Indian doctor had trained and fasted for many years until he found the power for his spirit. He could help anyone that was sick, and the person would immediately become well again. This was because he was so powerful. The Indian medicine man could also help a sick person, but didn't have the power of the doctor. He wouldn't have the power of the doctor, but learned certain medicinal chants and medical chants and words and knew the secret of the paints to heal the body and the soul. The medicine man was also able to be good or bad. The prophet didn't have any power to heal or any special words or paint to help people, but he had the gift to see into the future and what would happen to a person. In the early days, the old people would give the young ones advice and tell them how to live and behave, as such, how to be humble and kind. The young people followed this advice and also learned how to help one another and those in trouble or need. They shared their food with one another and everybody was happy. There was also much to eat: deer, bear, salmon, berries. When the fish were running, the rivers were full. If anyone became sick, they called the doctor who healed them. As time passed, however, people began to forget the old ways. They didn't listen to the good advice of the old people. They didn't share their food. They did not help those in need. One day, a prophet stood up in front of the people and said, "My friends, I have been told to warn you, your life is not right. And if you do not help one another, there'll be consequences to what you are doing today. We must change your ways and go back to our original teachings." He sat down and the people were silent. The old man stood up and thanked the prophet. "Listen to the words of the prophet," he told the young people. "He knows what will happen, and if you don't, things will change for the worst." After the prophet finished speaking, he looked around to see what the people would do. Some of them laughed at him and chastised him. "Listen to that gloomy old man. What does he know? We shouldn't listen to what the old people say. We'll live our own ways. Nobody can tell us what to do." Sadly, the prophet and the old people watched as they saw their words go unheeded. Everyone behaved as they pleased, and no one helped their neighbor. No one was humble and kind. Then all the game in the land began to disappear. The deer, bear, animals, and the fish all disappeared. The people weren't able to hunt, fish, and they became hungry. Again, the prophet stood up and said, "You received your punishments. Now listen and return to the right ways, or something even more terrible will happen." Still, the young turned them aside and went back to their selfish ways. Soon the fish began to disappear, and all the streams became bare. The berry season came, but no berries could be found. The people grew hungrier and began to quarrel and fight amongst themselves. Once more, the prophet stood up and said, "This is the last time I can warn you. Now you have received your severe punishment. Change your ways now, or you will be punished so strong that I can't even speak of it, and it will happen." The old people as well pleaded with the young people to listen, but the people seemed to have become deaf to good advice. Now they were growing worse, fighting and quarreling. No one was happy. No one was listening. No one was helping one another. Then one day it began to rain. The river started to rise. The Indian doctor seemed to lose his power. He could no longer cure the sick, and his patients died. The medicine man also lost his power. His special words and paints no longer worked. The rain continued and the rivers rose higher. The medicine man used to be able to control the flooding with his powers and his cedar stick by painting on and chanting the power. When he placed the stick in the riverbank, the waters would stop rising. This time, the water didn't stop. The river kept rising higher and higher. When the water was about to come over the riverbanks, the people who had canoes put their families in them and rose with the water. The others went into their houses with their families and their animals. Gradually, the water rose above the houses, and all of those inside drowned. The people in the canoes headed for the highest camp that they had and had to go higher still. Finally, all the land was covered and only the mountaintops were still showing. They floated to the highest peak in Squamish and anchored their canoes there. Day after day, the medicine man continued to ride on the side of the mountain to try to stop the flood waters. Day after day, the waters continued to rise until they looked all around, and all they could see was the peak of Inchikai, Mount Garibaldi, and another peak further south, which is Mount Baker, was the only other one visible. The people headed their canoes for Inchikai. The river was running so swiftly, and some of the canoes that were anchored broke off. The water was too swift for them to paddle back, and some of them headed to the other mountain down river, which is Mount Baker. The others stayed at Inchikai. The water started to go down first very quickly, then it slowed until a large lake was formed. The people went back to their home site, others further up the river. Some of them stayed where they were in Chiakamis. Those who survived were happy to be alive, back home, but they remembered with sadness their friends who had drowned. At last, the Squamish people returned back to their senses. When the old people spoke, everybody listened. People helped one another, and everybody was happy again. The Indian doctor and the medicine man were powerful once more. The animals returned, and the food was plentiful. Their creeks were again filled with fish, with abundance in berries. Everyone remembered how to be humble and kind. And then the story ends. Never again would the Squamish people suffer this terrible punishment. Never again would the flood cover this land. That's the story that we're told as young children about how we should be kind to one another and help thy neighbor. It's very interesting, the parallels that you see with the biblical notions of the flood in the Bible and the teachings that Noah was given by the Christian God and all of those types of things, and kind of the correlations a little bit. And I think that's why this story, I think, has transcended time in terms of reminding us of who we were. But when we start thinking about this story in a modern sense, some of our elders and our spiritual people will say we're again in a modern flood. The colonial powers have come to our lands and have flooded our lands with all of this different things, these buildings and these things that fly in the sky and all of those types of things that disconnect us from the land. And then if we think about it even in a more recent aspect, you can almost say that the pandemic is a type of flood, where it's an unseen flood that's kind of flooding the world in terms of reminding us. So the elders always tell us that our history is like a wave. It's like you're out in a canoe and you're going through the tidal rollers, and you're going up and you're going down and you're going up. So when times are good, you're going up, and then you hit this precipice, and then all of a sudden you start going down. So the question as leaders that we always have to our spiritual people and to our elders is, where are we on the wave? And it's interesting because people will provide us different thoughts. Because some of them will want to say, well, we're down here, we got to get back up here. And some people will think we're on the upswing. And that's kind of the reconciliation we have as Squamish people, to kind of go back to that story of the flood and say, are we listening to our elders? Are we listening to the gifts? Are we holding on to the gifts that we were given and listening and treating each other with humbleness and kindness and respecting all of those teachings that have been given to us on how to interact with the natural world? Our elders will also tell us that climate change, again, is another symptom of us as humans not being in sync with the natural rhythm of the world. So the world is just reacting to our selfishness, to our inability to be humble and kind with one another and not be greedy and all of those types of things. So I think about the chapters of change and how we apply it in a modern context in terms of that old story that's thousands of years old that tells us a teaching of, how we should be and what would happen in terms of if we don't change our ways, what type of flood is going to hit us. So when I think about conversations with my late grandmothers, they're no longer with me, but their teachings still sit with me, where they kind of say, remember those stories of when the fish didn't return, when we were flooded. What was the teachings in those? And ensure that we steer our canoe back to that way around getting back to that traditional way of thinking. And there was always a fear that the transition from Christianity and I would say a colonial way of thinking back to our traditional way of thinking, that people would get lost, just like people got lost in the flood and people drifted off to Mount Baker or they drowned or something of that nature, that there's a symbolism there as well. We transition and we try to anchor to a mountain and keep our traditions and cultures alive. You can kind of say colonialism has flooded our lands and we're all anchored to Inchikai. And there's just a little peak showing of who we are and where we come from as Squamish people. And as the waters recede, how do we then go back to our own traditional ways? So I think about that. I think about the story of Spoaz, which is Rebel Creek, right below the barrier. It was a village of commerce and trade between us and the Lilwat people that was decimated by a debris flow. And what our teachings tell us is that we shouldn't go there anymore. It's a dangerous place. It's a place of training because the land is always transforming and can release at any given time. But our Indian doctors and our Scomptons and the people that want to train to that power go into those really dangerous places to kind of seek that knowledge and get that knowledge. And so I just really wanted to kind of speak with passion of understanding the landscape and understanding the place names, because these stories are a guide to all of us on how we should be conducting ourselves as human beings, not just Squamish people. So that's why I said off the top, I have no problem this getting recorded, because I think it's good for people to hear. Because if we start thinking about the place risk that we already know about, earthquakes, volcanic debris flows, and we've lost people in modern times to debris flows on the Sea to Sky Highway. And when those things happen, our elders will get up and say, we have to remember to continue our ways and remember our place. So I will stop there. So we have 1 minute.
Thank you, Chris. You're welcome to keep going for that last minute, but this is a really, I think, a beautiful connection between where we are currently and where this land has been, and how the relationship with the land will really drive our resilience, our attention to the stories, to the teachings, and to our relationships will make a really big impact on how resilient we can be. So thank you so much for sharing this, these words that have been shared with you and that you shared with us to talk to. It's really a pleasure. Thank you.
You're welcome.
I encourage you to stick around at least for a short while to take a look at the comments coming in through the chat. People are very grateful for your contribution.
Will do, and I'll just end that us and the Squamish people in Washington State argue about who could tie a knot better to the mountain, because they say we floated up here and we say they floated down there, because one of us couldn't tie a knot properly to the mountain during the flood, and we have the similar story about the flood. So When we'd go down there for canoe races and community gatherings, my grandfather would always tease his friends down there of, oh, you're my relatives that can't tie a knot to a mountain and you have to go down to Mount Baker. And they tease them back. So it's a story that has stand the testament of time and reminds us of how to conduct ourselves and treat everybody with humbleness and kindness. So thank you.
Rishka, thank you so much for your words today. Thank you to Councillor Chris Lewis, Sitocton, for sharing these Squamish Nation stories. I'd like to pass it over now to Murray Journeay from the Geological Survey of Canada and NRCan to set us up with thinking about the framework through which we can understand the sessions that have been held over Understanding Risk BC.
Thank you, Susanna. For those who've been with us on this journey, you'll know that we've been asking this question, how do we implement the Sendai framework on the ground? But really, this question is what Sitocton just asked us to consider. It's really, how do we live in harmony with a landscape that is dynamic, that changes without notice? And we've grounded our conversations in the Sendai framework, which is an international framework with 7 goals and targets to help guide us toward a more resilient future. And I'm just going to take 1 minute of our time, or maybe 1.5 minutes of our time. You may wonder why we've been using the circle diagram. And for us, this is a reflection of so many things, but it's a reflection of design thinking and how to bring our knowledge to decision makers. It involves a couple steps, understanding where we are in this moment, understanding the risk, understanding how we might recover from disaster events in the future. It involves thinking about the choices and the consequences of our decisions and considering alternate outcomes to our future that maybe guide us in a more resilient direction. And it involves bringing that knowledge to people who have the authority to make those decisions on our behalf. So this is our roadmap. I think it parallels very, very well what Sitocton shared with us. And it's grounded in, I think, a deeper way of being, a deeper way of thinking about the world. Active Hope is a book written by Johanna and Chris Johnstone. They defined Active Hope as a commitment to find and contribute our very best responses to a world in which disaster risk and the promise of sustainability are outpacing us. And it's not hard for us to feel overwhelmed right now with these things overtaking us. And it has these same 3 stages, different words, but very similar framing: understanding the situation where you are, regardless of what that is, identify what you hope for and the actions that will lead to a more desirable future, and setting goals and targets to help navigate that way forward. It all starts actually with gratitude, an understanding of who we are and a gratitude for the place that we are part of. And that will be how we launch into these reflections over the coming minutes. So with that, I'll pass it back to Susanna.
Thank you. And I'll pass it over to Emily.
Hi, thank you for just that beautiful story, Sitocton. It was such a beautiful way to ground the work and find that presence in what it looks like to meaningfully talk about the space of culture and the space of risk and how we bring those spaces together through, I think, the work of reconciliation. My name's Emily Dicken. I'm from the Little Red River Cree Nation on my father's side, and I'm of British descent on my mother's side. I'm the Director of Emergency Management here at First Nations Health Authority, and really thankful to join you guys today on the unceded traditional territories of the Squamish Nation, Musqueam Nation, and Tsleil-Waututh. I was so thankful to be asked to join this session and pull together a panel that really dug into the space of how First Nation communities and how First Nations emergency management are walking through this work. And I wanted to ground this space in honoring what resilience looks like and honoring the space for wellness. I was joined on this panel by all of these knowledge holders that have supported my work on a day-to-day basis. Sequoia, Levi Martin, who's a Nuu-chah-nulth knowledge holder from Southern Lalem, Jody August from Southern Lalem, Stephanie Papik from Emergency Management BC, who's a beautiful Inuit knowledge holder, and Janine Erickson from First Nations Health Authority. And just really thankful that Sequoia from the Squamish Nation was able to start our work and guide our work in such a good way. Just on to the next slide. We were able to navigate through some beautiful dialogue and discussion on Indigenous approaches to wellness, and be guided through the space of application into applied action, into the physical elements of wellness and how to ground our movement and how to find that space of movement, and then grounding ourselves into the spiritual elements, finding that space of culture and reconciling it with the space of emotional, spiritual, and mental wellness for ourselves. It was a beautiful way, I think, for me to showcase how, as a practitioner, I'm able to find spaces for my own wellness in my work. And it was really something that I wanted to honor and share with everybody collectively through this process. And on to the next slide. And then through that, these were the reflections that were shared back with myself and the panel, and it left us in a good way equally as much as I think our words left everybody else in a good way. It was about the two-eyed way of seeing in the space of reciprocity across our field of practice and across our work. And these were the words and phrases that folks chose to share with each other in that collective space. And so I just want to thank everyone, just in my last slide, thank everyone, and just that extension of gratitude to open up a conversation and dialogue on how to ground our work and our space in wellness and culture. And I hope this is the first of many spaces where we can honor this work and approach together as a field of practice. So thank you.
Thank you very much, Emily. Our next presenter is Steve Litke, who is Fraser Basin Council's Director responsible for the Fraser Basin Council's water program. Over to you, Steve.
Thanks, everyone. And on that theme of gratitude, I really want to thank the organizers and funding partners and all the session conveners and all the participants. It's been a great round of UR sessions this year under some really challenging times. I just want to share some highlights of a session that we presented on the Lower Mainland Flood Management Strategy. Just got 2 slides here. This shows our process. And I guess I'll summarize that. Well, first, that this Lower Mainland Flood Management Strategy is a collaborative process at a regional scale, looking at the Lower Mainland and multiple interests and disciplines and jurisdictions, really aiming to reduce flood risk from the Fraser River and coastal flood hazards in the Lower Mainland. Over this time period, the partnership has broadened and deepened, and currently there's 66 partner organizations and participating organizations, many local governments, a number of First Nations organizations and governments, a number of federal, provincial agencies, infrastructure providers, all recognizing that they've got a role to play and have some exposure to flood hazard and risk, and recognizing the need to collaborate to address this really significant challenge. We've undertaken this process in kind of 2 parallel tracks that are related. One is to improve our knowledge and understanding from a technical perspective. So developing a number of tools, a flood and environment atlas to overlay different kinds of information to better see a holistic perspective on these issues, a flood model of the Lower Fraser and its various floodplains to better understand the hazard associated with different return periods or different freshet scenarios, a flood hazard assessment. And there's also been a dialogue and engagement process to learn from those on the ground what their experiences are to supplement some of that technical information. The second slide is really just where we're at. We issued a first draft to the partner organizations last week. I won't read the vision statement. There are 3 overall goals that align well with the discussions earlier to date. There are 17 different objectives, 66 recommendations in these different areas. Improving understanding of flood risk and hazard, reducing risk and increasing resilience for communities and ecosystems and infrastructure, and some work on flood risk governance. So thank you very much.
Thank you very much. And I was a bit remiss to say in that we're moving through that format that Murray introduced us to, where we started with active hope, and then that first step of understanding the situation and where we are in the process. And Steve and the work of the Fraser Basin Council helped us begin that understanding. And now I'd like to pass it over to Nicky Hastings, the project lead for the Geohazard Risk Project within Public Safety Geoscience Program at Natural Resources Canada.
So I was just saying that I'm on the Squamish and the Tsleil-Waututh First Nation traditional unceded territory. And the session that I was helping to facilitate was about coastal flooding. We heard from 3 communities in British Columbia. And the first one we heard was from Tofino, and it was interesting because it was hammering. The storm was raging out there. District of Tofino, the power was out, but we were really fortunate to have the District of Tofino Deputy Emergency Manager present, which was great. I don't know how he managed to charge up his cell phone to make it work, but he told us about how they're dealing with different types of scenarios that they use for planning. Along with his colleague Celia Hunt from Ebwater, they talked about the range of different sea level rise scenarios that they looked at in terms of informing their decision-making process. And then it was important to look at not just one type of scenario, but a whole range of them. And then second, we heard from, and they showed us how that impacted their community in terms of economic disruption and the environment and what that meant to people. And the second community we heard from, if you can hit the button, was from the Capital Regional District, which is 13 municipalities in the southwestern part of Vancouver Island. And they had recently completed a new tsunami study that with the 13 communities and First Nations. And what they had learned is it's not just a single scenario you looked at, but a whole range and suite of scenarios in terms of the various different types of tsunamis that could take place in their community. And then the third community we heard from, if you can hit the button next, was Semiahmoo First Nation, an urban First Nation, just that's located along the border of Canada, US. And they talked to us about, it's very similar to Chris's discussion today about how they had information from time immemorial about flooding that happened in their community, and that they really understood what flooding meant to them. But Semiahmoo was one of the first communities in the Lower Mainland region to have a all hazards siren that they've used and test on a regular basis. And that they are ready for floods because they know that they do happen. And what they told us too was that it's very confusing because what they hear from Canada and the US, from the Canadian government and the US government, are very different in terms of what to expect from a tsunami. So there's a lot of things to learn still, and how that can help to inform the planning purposes. We had 2 breakout discussions. We heard that was important to learn about the range of events, that you can't just look at a single event. You should look at the nuisance events to the moderate events to the extreme events, and that should be done in consultation with the communities. And that there's a range. The second point in the middle is that you need to look at a range of how to deal with multiple hazard components, so sea level rise, wave action, tides, and all to be incorporated, and how to understand what are the joint probabilities of those components. So that's from the hazard perspective, from the risk scenario perspective, from the planning perspective. It was important to consider a range of things, not just what the floodwater meant, but what it meant in terms of balancing priorities between equity and affordability and reconciliation and climate change. That it's a comprehensive approach. You need to have that holistic view in order to plan in those coastal communities. And lastly, there was the development of a need for guidelines that are currently being developed right now that will help to capture some of those best practices.
Thank you, Nicky, for I'm asking the impossible to take 2 hours of amazing content and put it down to 2 minutes.
Right.
Our next speaker is Drew Rotherham, who is a physical scientist at the Geological Survey of Canada. Over to you, Drew.
Hi, everybody. So as well, I'd like to acknowledge that I am on the traditional and unceded territory of the Kikate and Salish Coast people. I'm sharing some slides that Dr. Teagan Hobbs put together, and I'm really excited to be sharing these. So this is mostly her content, so I'll give her attribution for that. But this is a project that we presented, a pilot project for rapid earthquake disaster risk modeling. We convened this session on November 3rd. To show the existing capabilities we have with traditional earthquake risk modeling, and show how we could move that into more of an operational system. to be used within 10 minutes or so of an earthquake occurring. So the way this would work would use the BC SIMS shake map from our collaborators at MOTI, conduct a risk analysis using the OpenQuake Canada framework, do the post-processing and database preparation for API access using the bespoke tools that we've been developing here at NRCan, and disseminate some of this rapid earthquake disaster data quickly using the GOBC Common Operating Portal picture. So what this would look like here from the workshop, you can see this is a prototype showing hospital demand being plotted in purple. So this is the kind of information that we would aim to have, within 10 minutes of an earthquake. And you can see the hospital locations are pinpointed on top of that as well. So this kind of product could help emergency managers and public health professionals best utilize the resources they have based on expected needs. So we showed these prototypes to the workshop attendees, and we included the scientific and technical underpinnings, and we got some feedback from the breakout discussions. So this included expanding the program with a public-facing component, adding some information about social vulnerability, an educational program, which is obviously key, and finding a way to blend these results with real observations as they become available, which I thought was really a very interesting challenge, which would be very impactful, but also a really challenging thing to do, as well as adding aftershocks to the dashboard, which is something we hadn't given a ton of consideration to. Another key thing that we got as feedback from the workshop was being really careful about the level of aggregation that we calculate and disseminate on, particularly for privacy owners, or for the privacy of building owners.
Thank you so much, Drew, for providing that overview and also the outcomes of what's next. Thank you. Our next presentation in the section of thinking about understanding the situation and where we are in the process is Joost Van Olden, who is a technical advisor at Natural Resources Canada. Welcome, Joost.
Hi, everyone. So we had the privilege of being the last session, I guess. So we had our session this morning. And we used this as an opportunity to kind of present sort of our vision and architecture and progress on the OpenDR platform. So we just walked through our system sort of piece by piece, and we had some great presentations by some partners. We had ThoughtSpot do a presentation on integration of our open data into their decision support dashboard application, which I thought was very powerful. We had the Federal Geospatial Platform, who's one of our key partners and an integrated part of our platform, do a presentation, which I thought was it was great because it was an opportunity for them to sort of talk about what their plans are in the future for bringing that data out and available to the public more widely. And then we had a session that was run by Jamie Herring from Habitat 7, and that was a great session, and that was basically an opportunity for us to describe the process on how we're going to design the risk profiler web application. And so we were able to run some polls and gather some very interesting metrics, and I think we got a lot out of it. And so we have a lot of data now that we can feed into the design process. So for us, next steps, we're going to be opening up the design and sort of the day-to-day progress of the project more widely now to our stakeholders. And I think we did connect with a lot of key folks, so I think it was a very valuable session.
Yeah, you win the prize for getting done under 2 minutes.
Awesome.
Your candy is in the mail. Our next presenter is Malaika Omi, who is a scientific planning officer with the Geological Survey of Canada and Natural Resources Canada. Over to you, Malaika.
Thanks, Susanna. Yes, and I am coming to your screen from the beautiful traditional and unceded territory of the Comox First Nation. And I convened a session on November 2nd on the National Risk Profile. First, we heard from Dave Peterson of Emergency Management BC on the hazards of greatest concern for BC. namely landslides, floods, severe weather events, wildfires, tsunamis, earthquakes, and pandemics, of course. In the last 3 years, these have led to 1.6 billion in response and recovery costs, 71,000 people evacuated, and over 660 structures damaged. A strategic climate risk assessment that was recently undertaken by the province shows that many of these hazards and their impacts will increase in frequency and severity. So BC is working, of course, to reduce exposure and vulnerability and increase resilience. BC is doing all this guided by the Sendai framework, and they are the first province to have adopted the framework. So at the federal level, there's an initiative to implement the federal, provincial, and territorial emergency management strategy, which is also underpinned by Sendai, called the National Risk Profile. And recognizing that Canada is the only G7 country without a national risk profile, the NRP is an effort to develop and consolidate knowledge to provide a picture of current and future risk in Canada. So you can see here the pillars of the emergency management strategy, but the key pillar for the purposes of the national risk profile in both the emergency management strategy and Sendai is understanding risk. And so this is what the NRP is seeking to do. What we hope to achieve through the NRP is develop a comprehensive picture of multi-hazard risk in Canada. Sounds simple, but that's a large feat. From that, the goal is to consider capabilities to deal with this risk to inform investment in risk reduction and resilience. For now, we're developing and gathering knowledge from all facets of society to inform the approach. A first profile of risk would include floods, wildfires, earthquakes, and pandemics, but this will move to an all hazards profile in future years. Research on each of wildfires, earthquakes, and floods and pandemics is bringing new knowledge to the fore to inform the approach and support action on the ground. So my hope, as per the theme, is that this initiative contributes to a better understanding of risks in Canada so we make effective decisions to promote resilience. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Malaika. That is our last presentation, thinking about the first step. After we connect with hope, we ground ourselves in gratitude, sense of reflection and awareness, then we turn to think about understanding our situation, where we are in the process. And as we do this work, we also need to make sure that we are connecting with one another and with joy. And with that, it is my pleasure to welcome Jacques Lalond and Sammy Gowie as Des Astor and Earthquake Jake on the Des Astor Power Hour show. Over to you guys.
Oh my gosh, I am so excited to be here. I haven't been in a room, well, a virtual room, if you want to call it a room, with so many brainiacs in centuries. Oh my gosh, it's so great to be here with Susanna has Lyons. She is the queen of the lion den, if you get what I mean. She's fantastic. Okay, so we are going to start with our theme song. Hit it, Earthquake Jake. There's hurricanes and aeroplanes are falling from the sky. There's climate change and big earthquakes and no one knows why. There's so much death and destruction, I'm gonna have to take a shower. It's the Des Astor Power. Whoa, it is great to be here at the conference. I've never been to a conference before. I'm usually just here in my basement studio. My mother lives upstairs. It's so cool. I just want to say how great it is to be with you. Thousands of people taking these conferences, these workshops, learning so much about risk. Okay, I just want to do one thing though. As great as you all are, I just want to say that there's something I think I can teach you as a disaster expert here with Earthquake Jake. Am I right, Jake?
Yes.
Okay, so your formula is risk equals hazard times vulnerability over capacity. And that's just too complicated. It's too complicated. First of all, who knows what capacity means? Does it mean a capacity at the stadium or a capacity for love? I mean, nobody knows. So I'm just working on simpler formulas. For instance, Einstein had his favorite famous one, relativity, which is of course E equals mc squared. See, so that's easy to remember. Okay, also baby formula, easy for people to access and digest. All right, so mine is risk or hazard equals really bad decisions I've made times important things I've forgotten divided by the amount of booze in my system. So that's a really easy formula for people to remember. And I'm going to give some examples of how this can work. Okay, so you're in a relationship. How many people, put your hands up if you've been in a relationship for over 10 years? Okay, so I can't see you, but that's okay. I'm going to pretend I can. That's a lot of people. So it's your 20th anniversary and you're going to get together and have a dinner. So you want to mitigate the risk for the hazard. Okay, so you want to talk to your partner for at least 2 weeks before the event. Find out what they're looking for. Also, let them choose the restaurant. Let them pick the food. You see where I'm going with all this? This is going to make it have less of a chance of it being a disaster. Also, really good thing to do is to not get drunk the night before. Okay, so that's your first one. But I want to give another example for the people who aren't in a relationship. Okay, how many people out there have never been in a relationship or are not in a serious relationship right now? Okay, that's great. So number one, I just want to congratulate you because you are mitigating your risk of disaster by just not being in a relationship. Okay, you're making it simple. That's what I do. I just stay out of them because it's just less chance of a hazard and disaster. Okay, so you're at Wreck Beach. You're at Wreck Beach. That's a nude beach, very popular in Canada, world famous. So you want to, first of all, there's a lot of models exposing themselves there, or exposure models, as we like to call them. So your naked skin on Wreck Beach is a hazard. So we want to reduce your vulnerability to exposure. So you could slather a lot of SPF 1000 on yourself, like just really put it on, like it looks like you're Hillary wearing a pantsuit. Okay, that could work, or just stay in the shade because the shade is cool, right? It's cool in the shade. I wear my sunglasses at night. You know what I'm talking about. Okay, so that's mostly how you're going to mitigate risk that way. All right. So I hope we've learned a lot about simple formulas. What we're going to do is Earthquake Jake and I have written a little song for you that talks about risk, hazards, all that kind of stuff. And it is our last day here. So you guys have done some great work. So this song is called Our Last Day. Got to look after your neighbor. It's like a tectonic shift. Let's do you all a favor. A risk assessment is a wonderful gift. When the earthquakes start to happen, they will shake around the room. And when the rainstorms flood your basement, they will take a terrible toll. So we all have got together to find us a better way to manage risk when it's amiss. I say, listen to what I say. There are many disasters waiting and great forces at play. So let's put our minds together, 'cause this is our last day. It's our last day. All right. So we're going to go back to the Queen of the Lions herself. That's right. From the House of Lions, Susanna has Lions.
Thank you. Thank you, Des, Astor, and Earthquake Jake, also known as Jacques Lalond and Sami Gowie. We're going to dive back into the content and think about what we have accomplished today. As they reminded us, is our last day. So we're going to think now about that third step, which is to identify, what do we hope for? What are the actions that will lead us towards a more desirable future? And our first presenter is James Stiver, who is the Manager of Growth Management and Transportation in Metro Vancouver. Over to you.
So our session was on September 29th in the morning, and it was attended. By the way, I'm James Stiver from Metro Vancouver, and our session was hosted by Metro Vancouver staff and TransLink staff. And we made 3 brief presentations on 3 regional strategies that are underway right now, one being Transport 2050, the regional transportation strategy led by TransLink, Climate 2050, and Metro 2050, which is the update to the regional growth strategy. There we had some breakout sessions. talking about the challenges and opportunities that these plans are struggling with, and had some great discussions around policy levers to address some of the challenges we're facing in this region around risk and where we want to see the region in the future. So in terms of outcomes, we landed on the fact that we need to collaborate as agencies, as experts in the field, as sharing expertise and data, harmonize an approach so that we can all benefit from broader thinking and not compartmentalizing the issues. And it includes non-government agencies as well. So in addition to the expertise, we need to consider a broader risk and vulnerability of the region, and it can't be a one-off, with a view to reducing the shared risk. And we can do that better by sharing the data, sharing policy actions and directions together to shape this going forward. So with that, I'll just leave it there.
Marvelous. Thank you so much, James. Yeah, just kind of a bit teary thinking about all the work we did in September. It seems like so long ago now.
Yes, so true. Yeah.
Our next speaker is Murray Journeay, who is a research scientist with the Geological Survey of Canada and the Natural Resources Canada. Over to you, Murray.
Thanks, Susanna. So I represented a team called the Disaster Risk Reduction Pathways team. Our question was, how do we envision a safer and more resilient future for the metro region? So we built on the work that James and colleagues did. We brought together a huge team of people on the science and policy planning side to help us address this question. In our session, we looked at two hotspot areas in the Metro Vancouver area, the Vancouver Harbour and the Kingsway Arterial. And we looked at risk hotspots within those regions. And more specifically, we tried to understand those risks through the lens of physical impacts to buildings and people. So that map on the upper left gave us a picture of where the hotspots are. And we also tried to understand those impacts through the lens of who's bearing the consequence and the strain on our social fabrics, the map on the right. But mostly we tried to understand how we can bring these together. And the chart on the bottom shows us where we ended up looking at our current profile of risk and how we could reduce risk through proactive measures. And just to finish off, we really brought this to home by thinking about the kinds of things that we can do to get from where we are to a more resilient future. And these were the lessons we took from our session and that we'll take into future work. So with that, I'll pass back over to Susanna.
Thank you so much, Murray. And our next presentation is from Carolina Paul, Policy Advisor with Natural Resources Canada.
So I just wanted to start by acknowledging that I am on the traditional and unceded territory of the Coquitlam and Katzie First Nations today. And I want to echo also the thanks to all the conveners and the participants for this year's symposium. It was actually my first, and I got to say I'm really impressed. And I think the fact that there's over 70 people at the last session is only testament to the quality of the programming. So thanks everyone for that. The session that I was able to convene was titled Mainstreaming Seismic Resilience. And really what we were trying to do there is transform earthquake risk information into plans for more resilient communities. So looking at the interface between earthquake risk information and community planning. And so what we wanted to do together was give folks an opportunity to play with the National Earthquake Risk Profile. So for those who didn't attend the session, the profile is essentially, it's an innovative mapping tool that looks at seismic risk at the neighborhood scale across the entire country, and can provide a lot of information about the impacts that a significant earthquake would have on both the built and social environment. And so we were able to do a lot in our session. We were able to bring people to this new perspective and to gain an awareness of the impacts of seismic risk on local authorities and the communities that they work for. We really explored how the National Earthquake Risk Profile could be a tool to mitigate this risk. And we tested some of the policy interventions in the community planning lifecycle that could address this risk. So it was really interesting to see all of the perspectives coming together. And I think what we really accomplished here was starting to lay out that roadmap for risk-informed planning, which is really exciting to see and very much the start of an ongoing conversation for us. And I think what we learned is there's a ton of work to do together. So there's a really strong appetite to use risk information in the planning life cycle. Most of the participants that came to the session reported that the National Earthquake Risk Profile was very useful to their work. So 4 out of 5 on a 5-point scale, which is great to see. But they definitely thought that there were gaps or areas where they needed support in order to do that. So we've got a lot of work to do together ahead. And that's definitely where we're sort of focusing for the next little while. And in order to act on some of these learnings that we've come to together, we're going to be focusing on establishing a national forum in the new year to co-develop guidelines with planners and others to support this kind of resilient community planning. And so I know that I've heard from a number of people who were able to participate in the session already about wanting to be a part of that work and that conversation. But I would encourage everyone today, if you weren't able to attend or if this is an area of work that you're really excited about and keen to be active in, please do reach out, and hopefully we can continue that conversation together.
Thanks so much. Our next speaker is Andrew Pape-Salmon, Executive Director of the BC Building and Safety Standards Branch, the Ministry of Municipal Affairs and Housing.
So our session was focused on the role of government, and it was a conversation about options and action, and the two kind of compelling discussion questions we asked. One was, what is the role of government? What can we do? And two was, what are the various supportive measures? So there was a provincial and a municipal focus here. First, provincially, about the building regulatory system and how we work really closely with local and federal governments. We also have a free trade agreement on construction codes. Then we got into some technical material about some emerging seismic retrofit guidelines, building upon the seismic school program, the very successful program that the BC government and engineers and geoscientists BC have been advancing. And finally, hearing from Micah Hilt about some municipal drivers. And I just wanted to highlight the very last item there, which is social equity considerations, and the fact that some of the highest risk buildings are those that also house or are occupied by vulnerable populations and nonprofits and those kinds of organizations. So in our breakout groups, to answer those two questions about the role of government and supportive measures, we had a group talking about multifamily, multi-unit residential buildings. And, I think NRCan is really helping a lot with, data on risk factors, conversation about the need to do custom assessments of individual buildings to assess their vulnerability, given the broader drivers. There are some specific circumstances that can affect buildings. Not broad brush all buildings, but really hone in and focus on the highest vulnerability, the most vulnerable buildings. Obviously, a coordinated approach. And a key one, the second last bullet under multifamily, is around tenant transition plans. We cannot be advancing this via rent evictions. There needs to be a transition plan for affordable housing. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Andrew. And so we've just spent a bit of time thinking about, what do we hope for? What are the actions that could lead us towards a more desirable future? And then our last frame to think through this work is about setting goals and targets that will help us navigate a sustainable path forward. And on this one, we're going to get to hear about the BC DRR Hub from Sahar Safai, who's the founder of Sage on Earth Consulting and the DRR Pathways Project team member. Over to you.
Thank you, Susanna. I just got the sirens going on. I live close to the fire station in North Vancouver. So yes, I've been tasked to not only report about the BC DRR Hub session we had on October 20th, but also talk about the targets and the path forward. So instead of preparing a slide, I decided to make a website for you. And instead of reporting about October 20th, I thought it might be good if I report from 2024. So on your screen, you can see our BC DRR Hub website. the site that you have been using for the past 4 years as your starting point to find your way, your journey to understand and use risk information in disaster risk reduction and climate change adaptation in BC. Whether you start a new project, new job, moving around, new policy that you're working on in your municipality or First Nation community or at the provincial level, this site has been helping you to find your way around, to find the information that you need. We have a getting started tab for the newbies with some videos that gives a tour of the site and how the hub can help you. We have the search the risk data catalog. In this catalog, you can find the existing hazard, exposure, and risk data sets available in BC with the geographical coverage, owner, data, date that it was produced, license type, and link to the source. URBC is the key partner for data management, for risk data management in BC, and FGP and NRCan are key federal partners. You can find the case studies we have been working on and the policy note that has come out of those. You can explore the risk profiles, all that we know on earthquake, flood, forest fire, and tsunamis in a very easy, understandable, prepared documents at different levels. Here you can find the DRR and climate change adaptation tools that have been developed by partners or in partnership with the hub. And you can explore the past events, join future events, or suggest events, topics of workshops, or events that you want the hub to help you convene the science and policy partners. Scrolling down, and I'm going to share this link with you to explore further. Here, as you remember, in 2020, with the conversations we have had in URBC and the DRR Pathways Project, we had identified 10 priority initiatives that we thought we do need science and policy collaboration to make them happen. Here you can find the progress we have had. Some of these, the hub have been leading and convening. Some others, the hub has been supporting the partner to make this happen. As you can see, some of them have already been implemented. As we're in 2024, they have been already finished in the past years. You can find the outputs of these here. You can explore URBC. URBC is one of the key convening events, the events that the hub sponsors and manages. A few of them has happened in the past, including 2024. Call for submission for 2025 BC Resilience Pathways Report. This is another biannual report, status of resilience in BC. 2 others have already done in the past. You can find them. Meet our partners, meet our team, meet the governing board and the advisory committee. Little story of the hub, how it happened, how it came to life. I just want to bring it to your attention. This part of it, the end part, that at the end of 2020, the URBC community agreed to pull together all the existing resources and organically establish the hub. Later on, we managed to get financing, sustainable financing from federal and provincial government to give it more solid life. Our fantastic sponsors that we thought that we wouldn't be able to have sustainable hub are from federal, provincial government, and some other partners in private and public. If I may just quickly share a slide, bring you back to the present time for, now that I gave you a future report. Now in present time, what is next? Connect with us. Seriously, we have had conversations and discussions. We think like the momentum that has been built through all of these events, we need to not let that go. So we want to start small, take small tasks, connect with us if you want to connect your initiative to literally the site. We will make it, we will go live and start the mock-up. Also give us advice on where we can go after financing. Look out for the call for expression of interest for the report. And that's about it. Thank you so much. I would just want to end with a small reminder that today is the first day of the pathway to the future that we want to build. Thank you so much, Susanna. I'll share the link also.
Beautiful. Thank you so much, Sahar, for setting us up to think about. We've been doing all of this work to get us to greater, as you identified in your chats, greater collaboration and greater hope and connections and understanding of the initiatives and possibility to do things together that we can't do alone. And the hub, as Sahar was just describing, our future view, kind of thinking about where we are if we step into that opportunity of the hub, could be a very valuable tool to make these things happen. So thank you for describing that future to us. Up on the screen, you'll see here the picture of a few of two of our 4 dialogue panels. These were keynote panel style keynote panels, but done in a URBC style, that we're allocated a lot of time for Q&A and discussion amongst the panelists and a little less of the upfront presentation. We had local and international thought and action leaders participating. And the key themes derived from past URBC interests and inputs of the community, and the workshop we held in person to kick off in February 2020 helped to define which topics we would be exploring. So the 2 that you're seeing here, in September, we looked at low carbon resilient buildings, moderated by George Benson of the Vancouver Economic Commission, thinking about what have we learned about creating low carbon resilient buildings from an academic and practitioner perspective. Later in the month, we had a session on Beyond Death, Dollars and Downtime, looking at functional recovery in BC, moderated by Micah Hilt from the City of Vancouver. And here practitioners and seismologists and engineers got together and thinking about what does it actually look like to ensure we do achieve functional recovery. In November, our 2 dialogue sessions, the first focused on finance and focus. This was moderated by Puninda Tind, who helped us have a conversation about incentivizing investment in risk reduction and adaptation. And we had practitioners working both in the public sector and private sector thinking about what it looks like to advance investments. And then lastly, and on November 10th, we had a dialogue about resilient infrastructure in the age of the Anthropocene. And this was moderated by Christy McConnell from Macdonald. And here we talked about various kinds of resilient infrastructure, blue-green infrastructure, traditional infrastructure, security infrastructure, and thinking about what that actually looks like to ensure we are resilient to disasters in the future. So an incredible array of content that we have covered over the past few months. We're about to take a short break to look after our bodies, get up from the computer and stretch during this time. When we return, we will hear from Johanna Wagstaffe from CBC News, Jennifer Cutbill from Lateral Agency, Pouria Kourehpaz from UBC, more comedy, more presentations, and a chance for us to talk with one another. Come back, join us. We've got lots of great things to happen, but don't stay at your computer. I know you have emails you need to do, but don't do those. Stand up and stretch. We'll see you in a few. We are now going to think about some reflections. What stands out about how these pieces of URBC connect together? And when we think about planning for a resilient future, what would it look like to build on all of that has been covered and orient ourselves towards a more desirable, resilient future? So that is our focus over the next little bit. And our first speaker to share her reflections is Johanna Wagstaffe from CBC News.
Thank you so much. First of all, it's just an honor and a pleasure to be speaking to all of you. This is sort of like the Coachella of disaster mitigation and risk management for me as somebody who works in the media. As a scientist, you know, my day job is sort of talking about disasters as they unfold. And so as a scientist, I think a big takeaway for me listening to the sessions and speakers is truly how much work is being done on this that so many people don't know about. How many people are thinking about multi-level hazard risk reduction? How many tools are being worked on and being shared across agencies and expertise? And it is not only inspiring, but almost overwhelming how many people are thinking about this right now. I often talk to children about natural disasters, and after talking about earthquakes and climate change, even the little kids ask me how I sleep at night, and it's all of you. It's getting to tell them how many people are working on this problem across so many different agencies. So that's as a scientist. As a journalist, this will all be on the 6 o'clock news. Just kidding. But truly, it's a reminder to me as somebody who works for the media that we have a role in all of this, and seeing how all of your different roles fit together when thinking about disaster mitigation and risk reduction is a reminder that, I've had the pleasure of talking to some of you on a few different projects, thinking about how we respond to things like earthquakes and climate change, and what an amazing response we've had from our audience when it comes to learning about what goes into planning for the various futures that we face. And I think sometimes the newsroom can get caught up in accountability and chasing sirens, as we say in the newsroom. But such a nice reminder to me that information and education is a huge part of what we do, especially as a public broadcaster. And I think that's so important for me to be able to be a collaborator between agencies and between our audience, and a reminder that our audience has an appetite for this. They want to know what's happening behind the scenes. And if I can help share your stories or help educate or help get that information out, it would be my pleasure to continue to work with all of you. So as far as next steps, I think we should be doing more of this. And the only time I'll thank COVID, but one small silver lining is getting to talk to each other over Zoom. Now everyone knows how to use Zoom. Before, trying to connect to somebody from the newsroom via FaceTime and Skype was a 101 tech lesson for even many of us in the newsroom. So getting to do this has been huge, and I really hope we can continue with this kind of collaboration. So thank you so much for letting me be part of the sessions, and hope to work with some of you soon.
Thank you, Johanna, for your attention to this issue and for bringing it into the fore. This year, we were focusing a little more on the people who are, as you said, doing the lifting, doing the thinking, doing the collaborating. But in previous years, we have gone wider, involving the public and many of the themes we hear and how important it is to raise awareness. So gratitude to you for what you provide to that, and thanks for joining us today. Our next speaker is Jennifer Cutbill with Lateral Agency. And Jennifer is both the founding director of Lateral Agency and Vancouver Design Week.
Okay, so first off, I would like to acknowledge that I'm an unsettled settler and an uninvited guest joining from the stolen Indigenous lands of the Musqueam, the Squamish, and the Tsleil-Waututh. And specifically, I'm joining from the place known by the Squamish as Hiwa-Usks, meaning separated points, or now the home of Science World. So I feel an ever deepening resonance with this place, not only because I now spend literally all of my time here, but also because we largely exist today as separated points, too often further separated by the silos of our respective sectors, disciplines, and perspectives. But I think this vantage point also highlights what makes this amazing collaborative coalition and this event so remarkable. So while there are a number of standout reasons for time constraints, I'll just highlight three. First, the unwavering humility and inspiring diversity of this exceptional community. Just as for instance, in a single day, I was able to participate in conversations around how to shift financial models, financial paradigms beyond status quo cost benefit to embodied reconnection to holistic health through Indigenous brilliance, including a movement session to Tribe Called Red's Electric Powwow. Second, enabling and empowering our collective intelligence and our collaborative agency. Again, not just across discipline sectors and I'm learning today even countries, but also different ways of knowing and being and how these shift our collective purpose in relation. And in so doing, making the invisible visible. So from the Terra Cognita session this morning to intersections and interrelationships and new potentials now revealed so that we can better work together to realize them. Which leads me to things that seem important moving forward. And again, I'll highlight just a few. First, that we continue to deepen this integration of different ways of knowing and relating, embracing what Mi'kmaq elder Albert Marshall describes as Yuktimik, or two-eyed seeing, which means learning to see from one eye with the strengths of Indigenous knowledges and ways of knowing, and from the other with the strength of Western ways, and from both together for the benefit of all. Second, embedding responsibility, and by that I mean both our relational accountability, but also our incredible ability to respond. And lastly, placing, or rather restoring, health or intergenerational health equity at the core of all we do. And with that, ultimately shifting from asking how can we reduce risk, regret, and harm to how can we work collaboratively to empower healing, to be not just resilient, but to be regenerative. Potawatomi botanist Robin Wall Kimmerer, who I'm madly in love with, reminds us that all flourishing is mutual and that Mother Nature's gifts multiply by our care and dwindle with our neglect. We are all bound in a covenant of reciprocity and a pact of mutual responsibility to sustain those who sustain us. And whatever our gifts, we're called to give them and to dance for the renewal of the world in return for this privilege of breath. So building on Murray's call for active hope, I ask us to carry forward, what is our role, not just in resilience, but in mutual flourishing? And what is the bravest thing we can do to equitably empower it? Thank you so much.
Thank you, Jennifer. That was beautiful. Lovely, both call to action, connection, and reflection of what we're doing here. So thank you so much. Our next presenter is Pouria Kourehpaz, who is a PhD student at the University of British Columbia studying earthquake engineering. Welcome, Pouria.
Thank you so much for having me. I just wanted to first thank the organizer of this event. The more I learn about it, I feel like I understand how much I don't know about it actually, because there is a really multidimensional and complex thing. And I myself recently moved to Vancouver last year to start my PhD. And it was a great opportunity for me to learn and become aware of all ongoing efforts in regional resilience, considering different disasters in the region. And my background is in engineering and seismic resilience, and I'm working on Cascadia subduction zone magnitude 9 earthquake event. And the fact to see more people from different sectors are thinking about the potential impacts and making plans to improve preparedness is fantastic. And I think it's a great opportunity. One of the great things I think I obtained from this event was to know right now whom I can reach out if I have any question or if I want to discuss something about these issues and my research or in the future. And I feel like building a regional resilience is definitely a complex task and require good communication between people involved in this field, including risk modelers, engineers, social scientists, and planners. And even though people may have different differences in understanding risks, but I think we all, like I myself as a researcher, student, or people from different sectors, we all need to be on the same page in terms of actions to take to enhance resilience in our communities. And no one, I think, by itself can be successful alone to build regional resilience. And definitely, as also mentioned previously, more discussion and collaboration is needed. And I look forward to get involved in more events and more discussions about that. And thanks again for having me on this conversation.
Thank you, Pouria. Yeah, it's been wonderful to have you and to get your insights and perspectives. We noticed that, we had a number of people that joined us all the way along, not every session, but really a constant presence. And so I wish we could hear from everybody, but Pouria is one of those people, as was Jennifer and some others that you'll hear from. So thank you.
Thank you.
We have tasked our comedy specialist, Jacques Lalond, and his musical supporter, Sammy Gowie, to listen to what was heard, listen to what was shared over the last time that we've been together, and to reflect back to us, what is our community saying? What is the work we're doing? So you are now about to see improv based on Understanding Risk BC 2020. Over to you, Des Astor and Earthquake Jake.
Oh my gosh, I can't believe it, folks. My mind is officially blown. That was so amazing. Hit it, Jake. And feel free to sing along. Oh, not that, no. The disaster power. It's all right, we're not going to do it. We won't do it. I was going to do the disaster. There's hurricanes and airplanes are falling from the sky. We're not going to do that. We're just going to go straight to this. You people threw us. You were so good. We had a seismic shift right here in my studio. I just want to talk about how cool you all are. You are amazing. The expertise you bring to all this. You, my friends, are the unsung heroes because your very jobs, what you do is fraught with peril and hazard and incredibly high risk. And you know why? Because if you do everything right, nobody's going to know about it. But if you make one mistake, it is literally a disaster. You are front page news. So I just have to give you a big high five. That's 5 right there. If I'm going to give you a high 10, this is a high 10. I don't know if that's even a thing, but that's a high 10. We're not going to be doing the music for a while. Don't worry. You can relax. Okay. So also, you guys have the coolest names of all time. Okay, you're called geoscientists. How great is that? DRR Hub. That sounds like a great place to hang out. Superficial geologists, which does that mean that you're concerned with your clothes? I'm not sure what that means. Of course, there's bathymetry, which I think is the study of baths. There's volcanists, which are people who study volcanoes. I didn't even know Spock studied volcanoes. And of course, seismologists, proof that size does matter. So I just want to give you a big shout out. You guys are the coolest. Now, I'll talk a little bit. Has Lyons said that we needed momentum, which is true because that's much better than less momentum. And I love the idea of building resilience. This is powerful stuff. Resilient strategies. I love it. So first we heard about, I'm going to be really fast here, Jessica Shoubridge. She talked about collaborative since Inception. I want to say that was a fantastic movie, Inception. I loved it. Leo DiCaprio is so good in that. And she talked about how you work with no staff. I want to say that's incredible that you're doing this with no staff, because even Gandalf from The Lord of the Rings, without a staff, not that impressive. All right. Oh, she also talked about a bottom-up approach, which is great because, of course, a bottom-down approach would be a disaster. I also want to talk about, she talked in amazing, your story about the flood. It was beautiful, and it flooded us with wisdom and flooded me with great ideas. Murray Journeay, active hope, very powerful, because most people practice inactive, or what I like to call lazy hope. So that was really inspiring. And also, I, of course, talked about Einstein and his empty square. You talked about going full circle. Loved it. Emily Dixon, you talked about being dug into the space. I dug your presentation. Great slides, much better than a mudslide, which is also a disaster. You also talked about two-eyed seeing, which cyclopses are very jealous of. I just want to mention that. Steve, you talked about flood management. Just so you know, what I do is I just roll up my pants. I just roll up my pants. That's flood management for me. You talked about 2 parallel tracks, which is so much better than 2 perpendicular tracks. That's incredible. And you talked about 66 recommendations, which is what I get from my mom every day. Then we had Nicky, who talked about best practices, which is a totally new idea for me. I personally use worst practices. And tsunami study, which made me wonder, like, do people actually have to go into the tsunamis to study them, or do they just look at them from afar? So exciting studying tsunamis. Drew, you talked about a shake map. How cool is a shake map? I love the idea of modeling workshops because everyone needs to know how to model. Whoa, there went my thing. That was really exciting. That was a disaster. Okay, then we had Used. Uh-oh, something's happened here. We had Used. Wow, this was amazing. A long day for Used, let me tell you that. He thought about that. We heard about Thought Spot, which is incredible, much better than White Spot. Also, great colors in your graphs. And also, you get the On Time Award. That was incredible. Malika, 1.6 billion. Wow, that's an increase in exposure right there. No risk profile at the G7. I can't believe that. And you talked about the key pillars. Very good. And you said NRP. Just so you know, it's pronounced energy. It's pronounced energy, not NRP. Just letting you know. Then we had James. You followed me. You know, I want to say following me was not a problem, James, because brains after dumb always works. I loved you. Also, you talked a lot about focusing on 2050, which is, I think, a great idea because most people can afford 2050. If it was like $29.99, that's too expensive. You also talked about breakout sessions, which I think is better than a break-in session because that's illegal. Murray, you looked a lot like that first guy named Murray. Incredible. You talked about hot spots. My personal favorites are the Roxy or Brown's Social Club. Those are my favorite hot spots. Carolina, you played with seismic risk profiles. Yeah, I remember we had a game like that when I was a kid, it was called Rampage. There was a giant monkey and a giant wolf. It was fantastic. And you also talked about future actions, which is much better than past actions, because for past actions, we need to invent a time machine, which I'll talk about later. Andrew, you asked us, what is the role of government? Well, other than giving me money or us money, I can't think of anything, but I could say so much. You talked about seismic retrofit, which I think is a cool name for a clothing line. Seismic retrofit, just saying that. Then we had Sahar, who actually invented a time machine. She made a website in the future. So you've now become my coolest person ever. Time travel, I love it. And also you're with the BC DRR, I think, which that just sounds so cool. You had a section called Exploring Risk Profiles, which I'm wondering, is that like a website for dating felons and criminals? I wasn't sure about that. And you also talked about low-hanging fruit, which I think is important, because if we go for the high-hanging fruit, that's potential for a disaster. So we need to mitigate risk that way. Johanna, you talked about the Coachella, the big disaster concert that we're having right now. You have the coolest glasses ever. That's all I have to say. And I want to totally be on the 6 o'clock news. So if you want to do a feature on the Disaster Power Hour, I'm so in. Also, your tripod looks like a microscope. I just want to say that. Incredible. Jennifer, you designed a whole week. I can't believe it. Also, I found out from yours that the Canby Bridge is near Science World. I thought the idea of separation being bad and community. So unity to come to us, right? So separation, bad, community, good. I loved it. Also, you talked about making the invisible visible, which I think would have been really helpful for the wife in the movie, The Invisible Man. Also, you mentioned the term botanist, which means the study of botan and mutual flourishing. I thought, yes, we need to flourish our botan. Lastly, we heard from Pouria. You talked about dimensions of resilience. I'm like picturing the fourth dimension, the fifth dimension, the sixth, the seventh dimension of resilience. So powerful. You had an awesome shirt, and I loved how you said we would be successful together. Great stuff all around. You people are fantastic. Now, I threw my other book on the ground, so I'm going to pick it up now. So, Sammy, you can just put a picture of you in the corner there or something. Oh, hit it, Jake. Been working for several months now, talking about the risks and the hazards, keeping people who stay at home safe, or when they're shopping at the plazas. We never know about the coastal floods, but we know about the raging fires. We understand vulnerability and how to make capacity higher. We know that to make a nice souffle, you need to have a supple risk. And we know that managing danger means understanding risk. Vulnerability, exposure. It's all about the mitigation, best practices and policy, securing a safer nation for the people here in BC. Exposure models exploding like a volcanist's fiery dream. When the coastal waters are rising, homeowners want to shout and scream. When you're in the kitchen cooking, making a lobster bisque, you know that you've got to crack some paws, because you're understanding risk. Come on, everybody. Understanding risk. Woo! Understanding risk. Yeah, we're understanding risk. Hey, yeah, yeah. Understanding risk. When you're making a lobster bisque, you need to be understanding risk. And back to the House of Lyons. Susanna has Lyons.
Marvelous. Thank you very much. Thank you so much, Jacques Lalond and Sammy Gowie, otherwise known as the Des, Astor, and Earthquake Jake team, thank you for your comedy. Thank you for your careful listening, and thank you for poking fun at us, because that it is a lovely way to reflect back what we're doing. So what I'd like to invite you to do is, if you haven't yet, go to menti.com and use the code 9970611. And we'd love to just capture a few more of your ideas. So the things that are giving us hope, the action ideas that we'd like to invest in more, this collaboration, the DR hub, sharing, and seem like some of our most important pieces in terms of the things that are giving us a future. I think connection with Indigenous knowledge and our Indigenous community is also something that is helping to drive us. And then lots of other pieces here for consideration, thinking about the involvement of banks and the insurance industry, calling for more of that involvement, making sure that we are really investing in partnerships and optimistic, connecting with our optimistic colleagues, open data, open science, sharing our knowledge, having a whole of society approach, thinking about our community, having really the diversity of perspective stands out quite a bit. Starting to identify some standards. Family is coming out. That is probably giving us hope. The openness, again, extending up out interoperability, thinking about the fact that there is continued interest. We are mutually flourishing. We are advancing the work together. These are all pieces that are standing out here in terms of where we're headed and what would give us hope as we go forward. Please don't, no need to stop adding your ideas in, but we are going to move now to hearing some reflections. We have 3 more reflections. The first opportunity to hear is from Andrew Pape-Salmon from the BC government. Andrew Pape-Salmon is the executive director of the Building and Safety Standards branch and of British Columbia. And we'll hear from Andrew, a couple other speakers, and then we'll actually go back and see our graphic recording.
This has been quite a conversation that's been going on for 3 months, and I would say that it, given the situation with the pandemic and the fact that we've moved this discussion to a virtual setting has been advantageous because I feel like we've been able to build the momentum, and it's been kind of like a crescendo of increasing impact over the 7 or 8 or 10 conversations that we've had since August. And some of the key themes that have emerged. I'm going to speak about decision-making and collaboration, relationships with local government, information and data, and finally, kind of building code and regulatory lever related observations. So first, from the perspective of decision-making and collaboration, all levels of government and key influencers across society have a role to play in reducing the risks posed by disasters such as earthquakes and climate change. The federal, provincial, and local, given the federation that we have here in Canada, all levels of government, and I often say 5 levels of government, so federal, provincial, Indigenous, regional, and municipal governments our efforts must complement and support each other. And I think the hope is that there's a harmonized approach that's going, all of us moving in the same direction. And when, if and when, I should say when, most likely the Emergency Program Act is modernized to bring the Sendai framework into our legislative construct in British Columbia, I feel like that will provide a unifying or it will allow for unification at all 5 levels of government, because we'll all be able to reference that common platform and that common framework for our respective work as governments, and similarly outside of the sphere of government intervention in the economy and society. The Sendai framework will provide a focal point for early adoption by the public, investors, the development community, other types of industry. So I think that will be a key element. I think the key goal is for better decision making, so that when we are making decisions about investing in buildings and critical infrastructure and other aspects of our economy, that we have the long view, and considering the full extent of risks and vulnerabilities and future damage costs that inaction will lead us to. And rather than going down that path, to look at a resilient approach to building up buildings and infrastructure in our communities to avoid those damage costs in the future. The provincial government has a role to play to ensure that local governments and Indigenous communities have the capacity, expertise, and the resources necessary to implement effective disaster risk reduction measures and strategies. And we can support that. That guidance and support is essential and can take many forms. Information and guidance and tools need to be clear, certain, and practical. And so, the province and other levels of government can provide common platforms, open data, etc.
30 seconds.
Thank you. Expertise is needed to distill the technical information in a way that makes it understandable to the public, to politicians and decision makers. We need to learn from past events, including the oral history of Indigenous communities. The 1700 earthquake is in our historic knowledge, but not necessarily in our historic books. And so I feel that there's a need to tap on the oral history of disasters that have affected our province in the past, and to learn from that. And in closing, the building code, and this is the area that I'm responsible for, and there's similar kinds of regulations and standards in place for critical infrastructure. The building code, although it is ultimately a regulatory instrument, it can also be a leadership driving instrument, like providing a technical roadmap to the future with opt-in codes that the leaders can adopt early, and it also signals where we're going in the future, such that people can prepare for the inevitable where it becomes the minimum standard. Thank you.
Thank you, Andrew. What a thoughtful reflection on the various roles different parts can play, and particularly the role of the provincial government. And really appreciate your involvement throughout URBC, both at the beginning kicking us off, and here you are at the end with your words. So thank you. Our next reflection is from Meredith Fyfe. Meredith is a master's student focusing on geophysics and seismic hazards at Western University. Welcome, Meredith.
Thanks so much for having me speak. I've really enjoyed this entire conference series. It's definitely taken some hours away from my research, but I am super actually happy with that. It's enriched it quite a bit in other ways. So I actually study seismic hazard mapping and communication, focusing on Metro Vancouver, so this is very relevant. I've really enjoyed the sort of bite-sized bits of knowledge worked into every single presentation. and also discussing current research and current initiatives, all about risk in the region. And I recognize the importance of making sure that this is delivered at an appropriate level of detail for this diverse audience. And I think everybody's done a really good job of that. What stood out the most to me is the diversity of uses of hazard and risk information and the enthusiastic participation of so many different user groups. So through my research, we ran an in-person session a year ago with some engineers, planners, and emergency managers, and they were super enthusiastic and happy to have a space to collaborate and debate and discuss. And I'm really encouraged to see that this enthusiasm exists at a much larger scale, even virtually. There can and should be many opportunities going forward to continue this knowledge transfer and communication among stakeholders. So it's promising. As someone on the research and academic side of things, of course, of primary importance to me is to make sure our, shaking, landslide, and liquefaction maps are detailed and accurate. But complementary to this is ensuring that they're actually useful for the intended audiences. So it's important to continue to provide these opportunities for colleagues, especially on the application side, like planners, emergency managers, and policymakers. This opportunity to learn about the emerging science, current projects in the region that affect their work, and to keep everybody updated. I'm really encouraged by this collaboration. I believe that additional training on how to use and implement some of these new platforms and applications, like Risk Profiler that we were introduced to today, is a really important next step. In the same way that I hope that our seismic hazard information is implemented in the future, I hope that these new platforms and applications, which are obviously the fruit of a lot of labor, are widely used in mitigating risk and building overall resilience in Metro Van and beyond. So let's keep all these connections fresh. It's really encouraging for a young professional to see this in an industry, and I'm excited to get into it. And yeah, I hope that continues, and I hope that this sort of collaboration will truly help to build resilience sooner than later. That's it. Thanks.
And thank you, Meredith, for sharing those words and for participating so much over the past number of months. We've appreciated all your contributions. And our final set of reflections are from Marie Journeay, who you've been introduced to already.
My thoughts that I'm going to share with you today, I'm just going to take a few minutes to do that, really reflect what many others have already said. And maybe that's a good thing. Maybe that really means that we as a community are coming toward a shared understanding of risk and what it means to be on a path together toward a more resilient future. We, over the years, have been shifting our focus from understanding, impacts and consequences to thinking about functional recovery. At the opening session, Laurie Johnson shared lessons from California, what it means to live with catastrophic earthquakes and now a changing climate. And she reminded us that resilience is a collective action. It's a process that begins with a shared understanding and acknowledgement of what's at stake. And it unfolds through a mix of what she called bottom-up and top-down initiatives that come together at critical moments of transformation. And I'd like to think that we're here today at one of those moments of transformation. We've grounded ourselves in Sendai. We've looked at how it fits into other international agreements and what we can do here on the ground. And we've thought about where that could take us in the future. We've considered this question: what does it take for us to incorporate disaster resilience into mainstream planning and decision-making? We identify the challenges. We know that people are more receptive to these ideas, but we also are very mindful that these risk trends are outpacing our capabilities to manage. We've thought about solutions and opportunities, and I wanted to share with you a little bit of what we've learned from the community from the beginning. In terms of understanding risk, Fiona reminded us that we fear more what we don't know than what we do know, and that often people can be overwhelmed when presented with risk information that that ask them to wrestle with complexity and uncertainty about hazards that impact their lives and livelihood, but that we have opportunities to engage people in conversations to really help them think about their future. Many working in the engineering realm, John being one of them, has reminded us about the challenge that we face with current codes. While they do a great job for life safety, they don't cover existing buildings or what happens to those buildings after a disaster. But also has reminded us that we have opportunities to retrofit buildings that are safer and maybe even more robust than current buildings. We've had many people from across jurisdictions remind us that governments are part of the puzzle, but that there are limits to what governments can do, and that there are opportunities for us to build on the capacities that exist at the neighborhood level. We've brought a lens to social equity, thinking about who bears the burden of risk and recognizing that this is an important issue for us. And we've identified ways in which we can start to address that. And we've hosted URBC now for 3 years to bring deliberative dialogue squarely into the work that we do. And I'd like to take this opportunity to thank Susanna and Jessica for holding space for us to have this conversation, which is so important. And so as we think about the science policy integration challenge, yes, Sendai provides a high-level framing. But what it means to actually bring this down to the ground is to not think about risk as a static measure anymore, but rather to think about it as a dynamic and fluid consequence of choices that we've made that have led us up to this point in time and that will carry us into the future. And so I think the time is now. I think the challenges for us now are to start thinking about benchmarks, where we want to be, what we can actually do together to reduce risk, to start setting those targets. And I guess my call to action is, I think it's time that we act now to establish this work as a collaborative, place-based model of network governance that builds on all of our strengths moving forward. And so with that, I just wanted to say that I hope that this is our moment of transformation. And I wish us all the best and look forward to crossing with you down the road. And I wanted to remind us also that we're just part of a global initiative. As we finish our symposium here, we're passing the torch to the Global 2020 Understanding Risk Forum, which starts next week, with a powerhouse program of initiatives that in some ways mirror what we're doing here in a very small way in this region, but that remind us that solutions are being brought to the table every day. And I encourage you all to be part of that. And with that, I'll pass back to Susanna. Thank you.
And thank you, Murray, for that beautiful summary of where we've been and the importance of doing this together. I have a few closing slides, but I encourage you to stay with us, please. So the first thing I want to say is, you heard that we are a small team of people who have been working quite hard to learn to deliver quality programming in an online space. And so we very, very much would love you to take a moment to share your feedback with us. And I'll put the link into the chat right now, and you can pick away at the survey as we're talking here. Plus, as you see in the chat link where I just put, if you fill out our survey, you will get on the last page a link to our unlisted URBC videos. We have been working feverishly to promote and produce and organize and report and then create videos of all these beautiful offerings that this community has put forward. And so we have just managed to get up all of our events, but they are unlisted for the next little while, so that our registrants are the first people who get to make use of them, but everything will be made public in the new year, early in the new year. So please fill out our survey and you'll get to see that. I want to pass it over to Jessica to give a thank you to our team, and then we'll hear from our graphic recorders about this session.
Thanks, Susanna. As you'll see on this slide, there are too many names here to read each one, but just a huge thank you to all of our sponsors who we've thanked a number of times, the core sponsors and additional sponsors who without their support, this wouldn't be possible. And not just possible, but we've always tried to keep the barrier to registration low, again, in harmony with the UR Global Forum. It's a main point in terms of encouraging that all of society engagement. Our organizing committee, you can see a few of their faces. I have a few of their faces here in front of me now. Susanna, Sahar, Murray, Daryl, Mike. It's always a challenge to pull together an organizing committee for these symposiums, but this year with COVID-related challenges and a number of kind of false starts, it's just been amazing to have this all come together, and would not be possible without this team that you see here. Our session conveners and moderators, everybody who took on that leadership role to put together a session. It's a huge undertaking that you might not appreciate until you do it yourself. So huge kudos to them. And all of our contributors, speakers, artists, storytellers, musicians. Yeah, huge shout out and thank you to everybody. The volunteers as well, the small army of volunteers who helped from everything with note-taking, from everything from note-taking to graphic recording to help with the website. Again, not possible without the support of these people. So yeah, I think that's it. You wanted to speak to this one?
Thank you. And you may have seen this before, but in lieu of speakers' gifts and in lieu of other honorariums, we are giving a donation to Preparing Our Home, which is a Canadian community-based resilience planning program for Indigenous youth. And it supports them to reach their potential in becoming emergency preparedness leaders in their communities. And we're really excited to be able to support them. I'd like to, you may have noticed, Sahar just put in a comment in the chat. Please stick around because we have a special celebration coming up. Before we transition to that, I'd like to look at our graphic recording from today. Daryl, will you please spotlight that for us?
So thanks for putting that up, Daryl. I'm just going to say a few things that really stood out just listening in on these amazing conversations. What I really heard was that, you know, if you look at this, you'll see things that are on a very like personal, local level and just like an individual level. And then you'll see things that are on much more of a macro level. And it's clear that all of these things need to happen in concert. And so really thinking about social equity, and then also thinking about things like consistency and guidelines. So really all of everyone just coming together in a meaningful way from where you're at. And just to like echo what Chris said this morning, just that our homelands are laden with mythology that reminds us of our resilience. So that's a good reminder for everyone of what we're working towards and a way to connect back to the land. Gerald, do you want to go to the next one? So this one is just about, you know, what people are saying about what they valued. And I just want to really echo back, the community is so important here. People really need to get together. This is what I heard from multiple people. And there's just a thirst to connect and share knowledge, hear about what's been happening lately and like who's who out there, who's up to what, and just getting more people involved and more ideas. And also like just the knowledge and sharing that in a timely way and growing a network of practitioners. So you kind of have a sense of who's out there, knowing that you're not alone. And also sharing the science back in bite-sized chunks and keeping that momentum up because that is so important and just helping to keep each other motivated. And people said that they really saw the progress since 2017. So that's pretty amazing. And then I'll pass it off to Patricia.
Sky shared to me the other day that visuals create a shared understanding and help us work more effectively together. So thank you for reflecting those words back to us and pointing out what stood out to you in this session. This is more of an overview that I worked on of the whole session, starting with Councillor Chris Lewis. His introduction to the Great Flood and the story there and the parallels between that and where we are today. What are the big moves that we need to implement for a more sustainable 2050 is a big overarching theme. And As you see here, you might recognize the arrow from Murray's presentation at the beginning, just starting with gratitude, understanding where we are, then thinking about what we hope for and the actions that we need to take to get there, and then navigating a sustainable path forward. So this is kind of an overview of all of the sessions or the initiatives and focus sessions that were highlighted today. And yeah, just this is our moment of transformation. So thanks everyone for having us here.
Thank you so much, Patricia and Sky. Those were beautiful summaries of what we're doing, and what a perfect note in which to transition, because as you shared back Murray's words, this is our moment of transformation. It's our moment of transformation as a field, as a community, but also for Murray. And so at this point in time, I would like to pass it over to Mike.
For those of you who don't know me, I'm Mike Ellerbeck. Yeah, I kind of don't know where to start. You know, when you go to conferences, there's that moment at the end of a conference that's very emotional when that's been successful and people have learned a lot and people have worked very, very hard. And there's lots of hugging and going for drinks, and we're really missing that. And I'm hoping, I feel that right now, you know, a little bit strangely as I sit beside myself in my basement. But I'm looking out at some friendly faces and some people who've done amazing work. Susanna in particular, I can't take my hat off because I have headphones on, but I would take my hat off to you. And there's lots of people, as Jessica alluded to, that we, you know, need to take our hats off to, and this has certainly been a collective effort. But as Susanna just mentioned, this is a little bit of a time of transition. One of our dear friends and colleagues is at a moment of transition in his life, and I don't want to say he's retiring because he's not, but he certainly has a gray beard, and I know that he's been around for many, many years, and I think he is soon to be transitioning from his current iteration of his career into another one. I hope I'm not being too confusing or cryptic in my description of it. I'm speaking of Murray Journeay. And I think pretty much everybody here knows Murray, so I'm not going to, Murray's been quite prominent in most of these events. I don't quite know where to start in describing how important he's been to many of us at the Geological Survey of Canada on the topic of disaster risk reduction and getting us as an organization to the point where we can participate the way we do in an event like this. Certainly before Murray was around, we as an organization, I really don't believe would have been mature enough and in a place to understand clearly our role in it, and certainly not to take somewhat of a leadership role in this. And that is to Murray. I think, you know, I was gonna, we use these, what do we call them? Word clouds as a way of sort of capturing what everybody thinks all the time. And I think I've been largely conditioned with word clouds by, you know, my work with Murray over the years. And, you know, when I do think of him, I think of him as a kind, gentle soul, a ridiculously brilliant yet humble person who mentors with ease and grace. He's somebody who in our organization, with anybody who's ever worked with him, comes out of it a smarter person and a better person. And Murray just walks away as if he had done nothing.
We also have tributes from many of our colleagues. In the past few weeks, they have been writing, and we now have posted all of those on this website. So and there's a bottle of champagne behind your front door. So after this, just pop it, and too bad we can't be there with you, but I personally were very prepared. We couldn't get Sue to help us organize, but take your time with the champagne to read through this.
Murray, what I think this is about, you know, obviously you're not retiring yet, and your retirement, or if that's, I should call it your transition, there will be other events, but I think because of the way that everybody truly appreciates you and loves you so much, it would have been criminal of us not to let people be able to share a few words with you at the end of this important event. Your signature, I don't want your signature, that's a boring word, but you are stamped all over this group and the work that we all do. And you've shaped many of us, you shaped so much of the work that I think we look forward to you going away and coming back as our elder and continuing on to be you and to mentor us. But please know, as you go away, sit back and please sleep well tonight, knowing that there's a big, huge group of fans of yours and people who think the world of you and whose lives you've changed for the better.
Yes, on behalf of the URBC organizing committee, I'd like to thank you for